What the heck is wrong with Cadillac? I'm not talking about their products specifically, but more their general languishing in sales. After all of the investment over literally decades, Cadillac is stuck somewhere around fifth in sales in the US, and I can't quite put my finger on why. Welcome back to All Cars Y'all. If you're new here, my name is John, and I did a video some time ago about what the heck is wrong with Lincoln, and that was a little bit easier to put your finger on. They have only an SUV lineup, which is more focused on quiet luxury, but it's not resonating with consumers at all. Ford is underinvesting in Lincoln. But Cadillac's in a slightly different position. They continue to offer a largely full line of cars, SUVs, and now electrics, but their sales have really been stuck for more than 5 years, and certainly after their bankruptcy back in 2008, 2010. And why is that? Why are they not resonating the way some of the imports are? I've got a couple of thoughts on it, but let's look back because Cadillac has an amazingly rich history. They were, by their own slogan there, the standard of the world. They, for most of their time, personified American luxury, longer, lower, wider, softer, more powerful chrome, and it's easy to forget how many innovations they had along the way that others followed. I've told the story on the channel before that I had a buddy in college and he had an old Cadillac. I don't remember what model or what year specifically. I think it was like a 71 or a 72. And he thought a turn signal had gone out, but he couldn't find a bulb. What it ended up being was a primitive form of fiber optic that actually led back to the dash. There was a single light in the dash that would be carried out over to that reflector. Little things like that is what Cadillac was doing. So for decades, they were the definition of American luxury, and they were innovative. And it's worth pointing out here that for most of Cadillac's history, they've always been platform sharing with other GM brands, whether it was Oldsmobile or Buick. Cadillac was at the top, but they've always been platform, engine, transmission sharings. They've just been that showcase. Somewhere around the 70s, everything kind of came together at the same time. Stronger emission standards, stronger gas mileage standards, or any gas mileage standards at all, and changing consumer tastes. While the Mercedes and the BMWs were tiny fractions of sales, they were consistently growing. And as this book right here points out, as well as that one over there, GM management really couldn't even conceive why buyers would buy something, say, from Mercedes. It wasn't as large, it wasn't as glitzy, it wasn't as powerful. But Mercedes put their money into the engineering underneath it, not just the platform, but the suspension, the brakes, cruising at over 100 miles an hour comfortably. A time when Mercedes and BMW, for example, would move to radial tires, GM was still arguing that bias ply was what customers really wanted. Hundreds or thousands of little decisions like that. And so Cadillac ended up with an identity crisis. They had these huge cars, people were shifting, and although they remained dominant in sales, they had to adjust with new times. They began downsizing. And infamously, the Cimarron came along, a Chevy Cavalier with a Cadillac badge on it and a much higher price, and it was a dramatic failure and hurt Cadillac's reputation. Cadillac downsized some of their other cars, like the Seville, which personally I think is pretty good looking, but it hurt the reputation. It was out of pace with the market when gas prices became more affordable. Through most of the 80s, Cadillac had some relatively competitive products. They were struggling with their downsizing, but they had engines or transmissions that were just behind the times and not overhead valve or fuel injected or really anything that got people excited about the cars other than just pure power numbers. I've done reviews on this channel where you look at a Mercedes and you look at a Cadillac of the same year, and the Cadillac will run with it. It just does it in a much more primitive way almost. And then came the beginning of the 90s. And GM finally seemed like they got serious about Cadillac. They invested what amounted to a moonshot to come out with that early 90s STS, an all-new platform, downsized, North Star system with engine, transmission, anti-lock brakes, stability control, and everything else. And I love this car. It is one of my favorite cars of the early 90s. At least when it was new, before we knew some of the problems. It was stylish, it was comfortable, and the North Star engine, when it was working, was sweet. But what we found out is that those interior materials didn't hold up as well, just like other GM products. The North Star could be troublesome, and when things like air suspension did break, they were horrifically expensive, and many of those became essentially worthless vehicles. Cadillac continued to struggle. They had the Elante, which was a corporate way of saying, how can we make a car as expensive as possible, but it should have been the flagship. Much like Mercedes has a flagship large convertible, but it didn't pan out. Cadillac tried again, basing it on the Corvette. Didn't work out. Cadillac had strike after strike, but they kept plugging away. And when art and science came around, their new design language, I personally didn't like it. Too chunky, too blocky. There's no sense of classic to what they were doing. But that has been refined and smoothed and worked on. And arguably, their cars look fantastic today. I will say right up front here, or halfway through, I really like Cadillac. As much as I kind of aspire to a Mercedes E-Class, or I think to myself, heck with it, let's just go get a 3 Series, I really like Cadillac. They pluck at my heartstrings a little bit, being that American luxury brand. And I like their styling, and I like their interiors. I like almost everything about them. But I'm not sure I trust them. But it's amazing, for all of their struggles from the 70s and the 80s and into the 90s, they remained the #1 luxury brand in America until the mid to late 90s, about 97, I think, something like that. I did a moving chart where you can actually see what was the top brand, luxury brand in the US, and Cadillac remained consistently at the top. But when they fell hard. And now they languish somewhere around 5th or 6th, depending on whether people count Tesla as a luxury brand or not. Some do and some don't. But what's amazing is the numbers they're actually selling in, not the position. They're selling pretty consistently somewhere around 150,000 units, which is a big fall from where they used to be. But what's shocking is that Mercedes, BMW sell about 2.5 times more. 2.5 times more than Cadillac. Lexus outsells them, and at multiple periods, Acura and Audi have outsold them as well. Cadillac seems to be struggling along in this 5th place, and it's interesting why, because GM has invested so much into the brand. They've updated the styling, and sure, some products like the XTS were pretty, but maybe not Mercedes-esque. Maybe they weren't truly going after Mercedes. And same thing with the interior. They went through a long period of having a lot of piano black and haptic buttons that, to me, always screamed cheap, even though it looked good. They leaned onto the styling inside more than the quality, I believe, or the ergonomics. And I think that's the road, the middle ground that Cadillac struggles with. And I think they're going to continue to struggle with, because number one, they've got to offer some traditional American luxury. But at the same time, they're trying to compete with the Germans, but they can't out-German the Germans. And I don't know what the answer is there. Should they go more back to traditional luxury? People will say, well, most of those people have already died off, and that's true. The people who remember and drove 70s and 80s large, comfortable, soft-riding Cadillacs. But there's always another generation coming along who wants, well, gosh, soft riding would be kind of nice. But at the same time, they keep trying to straddle these sizes that didn't quite work. They were a little bit bigger than the Germans, but maybe a little bit less expensive too. They sold themselves many times as the value proposition in luxury. And that's not what people were looking for. People were looking for, we want less expensive, and they buy smaller, but quality. So Cadillac continues to struggle along, but I think they've really honed in on it here recently. They've put more and more focus on the sportiness side of it. They went straight after the Germans. They seem to have gotten their sizes all pretty close to what the Germans are doing. Their engines, at least at the upper end, are extremely competitive. And when you start to look at like the CT4V, well, you don't have to look very far for people to say that thing is better than a BMW. But it's the more basic levels where things kind of fall apart. And normally here, I would say, well, it's platform sharing. And I do think there's an element of truth to that. BMW and Mercedes, they design a platform for a luxury car. GM tends to develop a platform and say, hey, let's make it a Cadillac too. But I do believe in my heart that they are focusing on what Cadillac needs first from a platform and pushing it down. Now, I think there are some products they still have where it is more of a bottom-up philosophy than a top-down, but for engines and transmissions, I think it's still more mass market. Let's move it up and offer it as a Cadillac, offer a few hopped-up versions as well. And I think people sense that. It's something I've said many times, and I still believe I like Cadillacs. I like how they drive. I like how they look. But there's something special feeling about Mercedes, BMW, and Audi. Overall, so they have hits and misses in their product lineup as well, but there's something special about them. And remember, Audi is a Volkswagen. When we look at the interiors, it's largely the same thing. Take a look at these interiors. I'm going to put on the screen here of a Cadillac, Audi, a BMW, and a Mercedes. And there's nothing wrong with the Cadillac. It appeals to me very, very much. And I think specifically that Mercedes, it looks funky. Like they threw a big iPad down and put some weird materials on the dash with some weird shapes, lots of bling. But they look special. Whereas the Cadillac interior just looks nice sedan. And you get this general sense from the materials that GM is still not willing to fully commit. And I think that's where we sit now. I think GM may just be happy with Cadillac's position. They're trying to appeal to traditional buyers. They're trying to capture more of that, the people who'd be interested in the Germans. But I think they're playing it a little too close to the vest. I think the answer at Cadillac is GM, for better or for worse, needs to give the designers and the engineer essentially free rein for a while and let them see what happens. Because as attractive as I find the exterior styling, and certainly BMWs, for example, and some Mercedes can get pretty hideous, the beaver-toothed BMWs that are out there. But then you've got Genesis out here. Sales aren't great, but they're investing in styling. And they are producing cars with a presence. Unleash the stylists on Cadillac. And on the inside, take the penny pinchers out for a generation and see what happens. Really swing for the fences. Go for the best quality materials. Because right now, I think that Cadillac is competitive, but you get a general sense of great value luxury. They're good, and they might even be reliable, but they're not class leading most of the time. And so people tend to shop them either because they're loyal, like me, they like the styling, they like the interior, they want that Blackwing engine, or just they're a little bit better deal. I don't think there's anything functionally wrong with Cadillac, and I think they're 95% of the way there. But there's just these little decisions that feel like they're being held back a little bit, partially by tradition, partially by not fully committing to going after the Germans, partially by looking over their shoulder at Genesis, Lexus, or even Acura for that point of view, and just not saying we want to make the best in the world. And why do I do this and wonder what's wrong with them? Why are they stagnant? But at the same time, be optimistic. Well, it's because of some of what they're doing in the electric field. The Lyriq is honestly great looking, and in person, it looks fantastic. The interior looks fantastic. There's a few pieces on that flying buttress at the back. It looks a little plasticky to me, but overall, it's a gorgeous vehicle with a distinctive face with a presence. And then they've got the Celestiq at the top. Fantastic looking, not in person. I haven't seen one in person, but in pictures, it looks fantastic. And I think that attitude is going to continue to move down, and hopefully they keep cars. Hopefully they continue to develop and continue to offer a full line. Part of their sales not being stronger is because they don't offer the breadth of what the German manufacturers offer. You know, certainly you look at Audi and some of their more swoopy sedans, and then a basic sedan next to it, and then they had like the TT. There's a lot of things they've done that Cadillac hasn't tried to, but those are all relatively minor sales along the way when Cadillac needs another 100,000 or more. But I think there's life at Cadillac. I think they've got some swagger back, and I think there's this sense that starting with this current generation of what they're doing with EVs, they're actually starting to swing for the fences. The question is, after 40 years of constantly promising they're reinventing themselves, are they going to be able to do it this time? Is GM going to keep the funnel on of the money, and are they going to unleash the talent they have to truly produce some of the best premium or luxury cars in the world? And only time will tell. Let me know what you think below, guys. Thanks for being here.